and welcome to another Caffeine Entertainment video. It's Art here with the second half of my gift giving guide for the book lover with science fiction and fantasy recommendation. Now, one rule for this video is I stayed away from your major ones you already know, like Lord of the Rings and The Wheel of Time and The Song of Ice and Fire. So those books won't be on this list. It's more for lesser known series. They may be more widely known here on BookTube, but they're lesser known out in the real world. There are 8 of them on this list that I could come up with that deserve your attention. First, the Legend of Dritz series, Homeland being the first one by R.A. Salvatore. The first book is a bit slow, but the series as itself, as a whole, gets a fleshed out world and can't be missed. Dritz as a character is a solid character, fully fleshed out dark elf. It's not a spoiler because you can see the dark elf on the cover and you know that's Dritz. Then book 2, our series number 2, is the Accursed King series by I forget who it's by, but I'll put a cover here. Obviously, it's the series that inspired the Song of Ice and Fire series. George R.R. Martin himself said that. It's kind of a play on the War of Roses. It's just as big page-wise as the Song of Ice and Fire series, but it's a little bit slower moving and more political intrigue. There is some fantasy in it, however, obviously. The next series, as my phone tries to cooperate, I hope, is Homeland by Kevin Hearn. This series is really, really good. It is a fleshed out series. It is more science fiction than fantasy, but it's one of those series that dabbles a little bit in column A and a little bit in column B. That's why the blending and the melding of these genres is so common, because they mesh so well with each other. It's really, really good and should not be missed. The next one on the list, most of these are near and dear to my heart, but this may be the newest of the nearest and dearest to my heart, and that is the First Law Trilogy, the first book being The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I don't think Joe Abercrombie gets enough acclaim here on BookTube. I don't think he gets enough notoriety here on BookTube as someone a little bit later on down the list. But this series is historical fiction fantasy. There is magic involved, but it is set in olden times, set in the medieval times. But it is very, very, very good. It is a deep series that does mostly wrap up the first part of the story is told in the 3 books, The Blade Itself. The Blade Itself being the first one, and the other 2 just totally slipped my mind. But they're amazing in and of themselves. And it's a great book. The Last Argument of Kings is the final book. And Before They Are Hanged is book 2. There we go. Hello, brain. Welcome to working. So, The Blade Itself, Before They're Hanged, and The Last Argument of Kings are the 3 books in the series, in the trilogy. And yes, these books are big, but when you dive into the world, you'll get sucked into it so much that it won't seem like you're reading an 1,100-page book. For some reason, when I started filming, my voice started to want to crack. I don't know what's going on there. Number 5 is the Old Man's War series by John Scalzi. I love this series. This series is pure science fiction, but it's grounded science fiction. I don't want to spoil anything for you. I will tell you that book 1 is by far the most fleshed out book. John Scalzi himself said that when he wrote book 1, he wrote it to be an all-encompassing story. Not to say that the rest of the books in the series aren't good as well, but they don't reach that pinnacle. It's kind of like Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game. The rest of the Ender's series does not reach the pinnacle of the first book, because the first book didn't know that there was going to be a series, and that's the case in the John Scalzi Old Man's War series. But the other books, the B Team, the Human Division, Zoe's Tale, The Last Colony, the Ghost Brigades, they're all great books, but they just don't tickle the fancy as Old Man's War does. They just don't encompass everything that's good about science fiction. It's how I was introduced to John Scalzi. John Scalzi, the author of Red Shirts, the author of Lock-In, the author of The Collapsing Empire, the author of Fuzzy Nation, bunch of great science fiction. He's a true science fiction. He is the gateway author into science fiction for most people. Not for me, but for most people. He's the one I turn to and say, here, if you want to read science fiction, read Scalzi, because he's easy to grasp and tells a good narrative. The next book on the list, book number 6, is the Chaos Walking Trilogy. The first book being The Knife of Never Letting Go, The Ask and the Answer, and The Monster of Men by Patrick Ness. This is the author I was speaking of when I spoke earlier and said that Joe Abercrombie isn't as famous as Patrick Ness. This is who I meant, was Patrick Ness. Patrick Ness is more famous on BookTube, at least, than Joe Abercrombie. And to me, that's a shame, because they're both of higher quality. In some ways, Joe Abercrombie writes a heavier, deeper, better worded narrative than Patrick Ness. Because Patrick Ness kind of writes YA fiction, which is it's fine. It's neither here nor there. I'm not judging, but adult fiction usually has more interwoven plots than, say, middle grade, young adult fiction. It's just, the more complicated it gets, the higher of a stigma or a class of writing it gets. But I love that series nonetheless. I dove right into that series. Matter of fact, when they reprinted the series and made them all matching covers, I went and I rebought the whole trilogy to have matching covers, and I got rid of my first covers because I adored them that much that I wanted them on my shelves to look nice. So, while I think Joe Abercrombie is just as good as Patrick Ness is no slouch in and of himself, and the Chaos Walking Trilogy cannot be missed and should not be missed if you're a true fantasy fan. The last two series, and then I'm going to add an honorable mention as well. Now you're going to know the main series it comes from, but I don't know if you're going to know this offshoot. And that is Star Trek New Frontier by Peter David. It is an 8-book series so far. I still think he's writing it though. But it follows a crew that's exclusive to the books, and they are on the ship, the USS Excalibur. So there's no need to tie them into the TV series because they don't have to be, and they shouldn't be. And Peter Allen David is the best Star Trek writer above all other writers up in any era. You can argue which era is better, Kirk or Picard, and I fall on one end, other booktubers fall on another end, I'm sure, and other Star Trek fans fall on another end. Personally, maybe I'll do a video of that at some point and explain why I fall into where I fall. But the New Frontier series is by far my favorite. Most of the early ones now you can only get in ebook form unless you special order them. Talking today seems to be a challenge. But if you special order them, you can get them in physical form. But I got them in ebook form because Peter David puts them out as pretty cheap. So, and they're really, really good. They're about 440 pages each, which is a good length for a good science fiction novel. And they hold true to the ideals of Star Trek, the exploration and the humanity. So it's a great series, which will thankfully never be turned into a TV property, at least we hope. The last series, I think, will have a little bit more notoriety thanks to the video game and thanks to the soon-to-be Netflix series. And that's the Witcher series by Andrzej Strahovski. It is a Swedish series. It is a more brutal series and gruesome series, and it's true fantasy at its finest. It's epic. And Geralt of Rivia from the books is markedly different from Geralt of Rivia from the Witcher games. And hopefully, we don't know about the Witcher series yet, Henry Cavill playing Geralt, but we shall see where Geralt of Rivia from the TV series lies. If it's somewhere in between, or if it leans more toward the books or the games. I think most of the people who watch the Netflix series will be coming it from playing The Witcher 1, 2, and 3 by CD Projekt Red, but I'm hoping that if you see this, you'll come at it from where I did, having experienced both sets of Geralt of Rivia lore, I guess would be the best way to put it. And my honorable mention series, and it's only honorable mention because the first 3 books are the price you pay to get in the series. And that is the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Yes, they are more mainstream, but I don't really see them talked about on BookTube. That's why they're on this list. The first 3 books are basically cookie cutter fantasy mystery fiction. And you can tell that Jim Butcher, you can tell that he cut his teeth on the first 3 novels. After the first 3 novels, the series picks up markedly, gains steam, and he's still writing it to this day. So that's another series that should not be missed. But that is my holiday gift-giving recommendation for these science fiction and fantasy lovers in your life, or show this to a science fiction and fantasy show this to your family and tell them the series you haven't read. Let me know in the comments down below if you would recommend any more science fiction or fantasy lesser known series. And please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Ding the notification bell if you want to be notified for when I upload a video. And remember, I make videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday at 12:30 p.m. Central, 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So without further ado, I'll see you again soon. Happy reading, and peace!